Good afternoon, and welcome to this lunchtime webinar on influencing Metro mayors. I'm Jerry Silverstone. I'm a member of the CIPR's Public Affairs Group who are holding this webinar today. I am also in the day job. I am the CEO and founder of Silverstone Communications. I always say that we are Brighton's largest political communications consultancy, but I think we're probably Brighton's only political communications consultancy. So both facts are true. With last year's May's elections bringing a sweep of Labour Metro mayors to power, and the point that the Prime Minister made to hold a meeting in Number 10 on his first Monday in power with the Metro mayors, national organisations or engaged in lobbying are now becoming more and more increasingly cognizant of the need to engage with those regional mayors as well as Whitehall. There are many public practitioners who've been doing this work for many years, and I imagine that they probably are now feeling a mix of encouragement but also annoyance, as others are now trying to start to get in on their game. And then with the publication of the devolution white paper and the forthcoming bill, the government aims to deliver on their frequently asserted belief that over the last 6 months, that those with skin in the game are the ones that are best, the best to know what they would need for their local areas. In May, we have 4 further Metro mayoral contests in different parts of England, and all are going to be very hotly contested. Today, we have an excellent panel of experts to share their reflections on what it actually means to effectively influence Metro mayors. Some quick housing tips from me before we start. The last quarter of the webinar is dedicated to questions from the audience, so please do pop them in the Q&A box rather than the chat. And we're also, just to let you know, we are recording this event, so if you want to recap on anything, you'll be able to do so. But that's enough talking from myself. Let me start by introducing our panelists, and who best for them to talk about themselves. Talk about them themselves. So I'm going to go first of all to Larry.
Hiya, thank you very much for having me on the panel today. I'm a policy advisor at Labour Together. I focus on devolution, and we've been doing a lot of work with mayors to see how we can best support them given the kind of changes that are going on in the devolution landscape. It's probably worth giving an intro to Labour Together. We're a uniquely political think tank. We were founded in 2017 by a group of MPs who wanted to turn the party towards the public again. And our guiding mission, it says it on the website, it says that everything that we do is to help Labour win and govern and indeed win again. There are around 20 of us in the organisation. We're pollsters, policy experts and political strategists with experience across the government, public and the private sector. And our work is characterised by a laser-like focus on voters, what their priorities are and how a Labour government can best respond to their needs and concerns. So obviously, as part of that, we do a lot of public opinion, polling and work. My particular background is in regional politics. I've worked with 2 MPs, 1 mayor and for the Labour Party itself during the general election campaign in the north of England. Like others on the panel, I believe that for too long, powers have been geographically concentrated in Westminster to the detriment of most parts of the UK. And this often looks like lower spending on transport, infrastructure, housing, and it just means that where you live does actually determine the quality of life you'll lead. And it has further implications to all areas of life. And, you know, Labour are hyper-cognizant of this problem. Before the election, they signalled their intent to both widen and deepen devolution to more areas. And, you know, they follow through with that commitment. There are lots of really excellent policy thinkers in this space. You know, we've got Rosie on the panel, who is one of them. And one thing that we wanted to do at Labour Together was kind of try and address the gap in some of the thinking, which we thought was a bit of public research. So we thought that there wasn't enough public opinion research done on how people who had currently experienced English devolution felt about it, and how those that were going to have some devolution, i.e. the 2 areas that are coming up, so Hull and East Yorkshire and Greater Lincolnshire, felt about how devolution had gone so far and what it meant for them. And so for the first time, we polled all of those combined authority areas individually. So we only spoke to people within those kind of geographic constraints. And we basically found out how they felt about devolution. Did they know who their mayor was? How did they feel about their mayors and the sort of policy areas that they should be in charge of? And listen, the bottom line is people want mayors to have more power and say over things. And that those areas that have got the kind of highest amount of powers, so we proxied that using the old settlement system, you know, level 3, level 4, etc., were more happy to take on, were more happy with devolution and more happy for their mayors to take on these powers. So the top line is, and to the top line to everyone listening to this webinar, is this is here to stay. The question for you is going to be not if you engage with this new system, but how you engage with the new system and how you adapt to this new complex regional dynamics of stakeholders, you know, both political and otherwise, and what this means for the work going forward. So, and I hope this panel will help you answer that question a little bit better than before.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Hilary. I'm going to go on to our next panelist, and that's Rosie.
Hi, I'm Rosie Lockwood. I'm Head of Media and Advocacy for IPPR North. So IPPR North is the leading think tank for the North and for England's regions. We're an independent charity and we're not aligned to any political party. So what do? We do research, we develop policy ideas, and we work with leaders on our mission, which is to reduce place-based inequality and enable people in all of England's regions to be able to live a good life and to thrive. Why do we do what we do? This point has been made already, but I'd really like to reinforce it, which is that on everything from health to income to productivity and to jobs, ours is the most divided country of any advanced economy. So where you were born will literally affect the kind of life that you will live, and actually for how long you will live it. The reason for this is centralisation. So centralisation is a root cause of our divides. It's bad for people, it's bad for the economy, and it's bad for our democracy. But devolution, the process of transferring power from the centre outwards, is the antidote to many of these challenges that we have. So devolution is something that we at IPPR North have championed, and we've successfully worked to mainstream since our inception 20 years ago. And since they were first elected in 2017, we've worked with mayors outside of London and combined, or now, as they're called now, strategic authorities, to support the rollout of devolution and to work ultimately to improve outcomes in local places so that we can narrow those divides. So that's me, and that's the kind of the background to what we do.
Cheers, thanks, Rosie. And our final panelist, Ben. Do you want to introduce yourself, Ben?
Yeah, thanks, Jerry. Firstly, thanks for the invite and for the CIPR and Caitlin for organising. For around 4 years, and in what now feels like a former life, I was Andy Street's advisor, Mayor of the West Midlands. In that role, I've covered policy areas ranging from transport, environment, and the economy, so a broad brief. Before that, I worked in academia on regional economic development at the University of Birmingham, an organisation called City Ready. I did some work with the then Industrial Strategy Council on subnational regional governance structures, so essentially devolution. And we were able to provide the academic rigour which has fed into the department's call for devolution, including what was then called level 4 structures, now strategic combined authorities. I'm sure in a few years' time they may have another name, but I was pleased and very proud to be part of that devolution process. Currently, I am a Senior Public Affairs Manager at Zurich Insurance, and I'm very much looking forward to the discussion today.
Great, thank you, panel. And I think let's start off, and this is either for, I'm going to go to Rosie first of all, for you to just give us a shape and an idea of where you think public affairs practitioners have been able to make a real impact in terms of lobbying Metro mayors to date.
Yeah, sure. So I can speak for myself. So I can give a couple of examples that where we've kind of achieved impact at IPPR North. So the first example is on buses. So outside of London in England, the bus landscape is a bit of a mess. It's completely deregulated. So something that we did was we did some research on this, and we found that franchising buses or bringing buses under public control would help to alleviate many of the problems we were seeing around like access, charging, and environmental impacts. So we did some work on this, and we worked with combined authorities, and now we are seeing quite a few combined authorities pursuing the franchising model and bringing buses back under public control. And in fact, last month, Greater Manchester completed franchising. They became the first city region to complete bus franchising in their area. So that's a kind of a tangible example. Another one is employment charters. So again, we did a piece of work quite a few years ago now, calling for employment charters, and in particular a Northern Employment Charter. And this is about driving up standards within a local area in relation to employment practices. So, championing living wages and inclusive employment practice. These have now been adopted by many combined authorities. We see them in, West Yorkshire and Liverpool City region and Greater Manchester. And so that's a kind of another example of a policy that we've been able to successfully see rolled out across a few combined authorities. I think there are probably a few factors in determining our success on being able to do this. The first is a strong evidence base. We're a think tank, and we have very rigorous. We produce very rigorous research. So of course, a strong evidence base, is very important to us. And we always use, when we're engaging with places, place-based data where it is available. And if it's not available, the closest to that place that you can access to be able to illustrate the problem and the solution. A second factor in determining success, I think, is a very intentional comms strategy that makes the case for the mayor and the combined authority to adopt the policy within their area and build public support for your idea locally among their voters. Very, very important is engaging directly with the combined authorities on the ideas. And when I say the combined authorities, I mean the combined authority and not just the mayor. I think it's very important to remember that that there are officers to engage with, and there are also parts of strategic authorities to engage with. So, for example, on transport, on bus franchising, we've engaged quite a bit with Transport for Greater Manchester, which has its own external affairs function. So it's important to think about, who within the combined authority do we need to speak to beyond the mayor. Collaborating with others is another important factor in securing success. So on employment charters, we've collaborated with trade unions. On bus franchising, we've collaborated with transport groups. And our success is not our success alone, it's the success of people that we've collaborated with too. And then attending and speaking at events and roundtables, particularly those in the area that officers from the combined authority are going to be attending, is another way that I think that we were able to deliver impact across those two examples. And I also think it's really important to remember that mayors are power holders in their own right, but they're also power influencers. So we have been able to influence policy at the mayoral combined authority level, but also at the national level, working with mayors as partners to be able to influence the process of devolution. So as well as influencing policy within a combined authority area, I think there is still opportunity to influence actually what does the rollout of devolution look like. And I would just kind of make a final point. If you want to influence a mayor and if you want them to adopt your policy idea, Jerry mentioned at the beginning that the local elections and mayoral elections are going to be happening in May, and there are going to be some areas that will deliver a mayor for the first time. Getting into a mayor's manifesto, I think, could be really key. So mayoral combined authority is a body that is made up of the constituent local authorities, and it is chaired by the mayor. The mayor doesn't have the mayor doesn't run the combined authority, they chair it. And sometimes it can be difficult to get local authority leaders to agree on something, but the mayor's manifesto is often respected because it has that direct mandate. People have voted for it. So if you get your idea into a manifesto, I think that, that's really key.
That's a really good idea. I really like that idea, and especially for those of us who are now seeing devolution happening for the first time. I really like that as a takeaway. Ben, what would your reflections be from the West Midlands?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Joe. I think public affairs teams have already made a real difference, and we saw that in the West Midlands by targeting areas where metro mayors have direct influence: transport, housing, economic development, powers that are devolved and give mayors room to manoeuvre. During my time advising Andy, we saw this firsthand in the West Midlands.
Saying something, weren't we then? So thank you very much for just bearing with us. We just had a small technical hitch, but let the show continue. And I think we were talking to Ben, and Ben was just going to give us 3 really good examples of where public affairs practitioners have made a real impact. Ben?
That's correct, until we were booted off the call. So apologies to everyone for our technical mishap, but I shall soldier on. The first example I'll give, which is a good example of how public affairs has made a real impact on lobbying us in the West Midlands and Andy at the time, was firstly, a consortium wanted to bring open rail access to the region with a new direct route to London. They approached us and pushed for our support. Crucially, they brought data showing how it would boost local jobs and connectivity, and it resonated because we were determined to enhance transport connection inter-region and intra-region. We were already focused on making the region a transport hub. So that project got traction, partly because of their persistence and alignment with our vision and the clear benefits. Another good example is housing. Housing developers lobbied us to use the mayor's new devolved powers after 2023 to up the number of social homes. That they didn't just ask, they came with practical ideas like partnering with us to hit targets. Andy took that seriously, and it fed into his pledge to treble social housing and was a part of his re-election campaign manifesto. The third example is a large national energy firm, I won't say who, approached us identifying they had significant capital and they wanted to spend it in the West Midlands, which of course you can imagine was music to our ears. Their offer was a partnership. And within months, we had a memorandum of understanding and a commitment from the company to spend over £1 billion in the region on clean energy infrastructure. Where firms can really succeed here is when they tap into what a mayor can actually deliver and back it up with evidence. It's less about grandstanding and more about workable solutions that fit the mayor's agenda. So the real lessons from those examples, and on part this, if it's the only bit of advice I can give, are twofold. Think locally. Present a case with data and evidence to the mayoral team and the CA on what are the local benefits. How will this project benefit the region? And secondly, think in partnerships. How can you bring public-private partnership to life? Can the firm you're representing offer a memorandum of understanding, as an example, commitment on capital, accelerated project delivery? This can be in a formal structure that is supported with a board or informal, but think in partnerships.
Excellent, Ben. That's really good. Now, I'm going to ask Larry this question. I'm not thinking about the past, but actually thinking about the devolution bill that is currently going through the House. What should public affairs practitioners expect in relation to that bill?
Yeah. Well, I mean, some of this is not actually guesswork. We have a white paper, published in December 2024, which was very long, very chunky, and spells out, in great detail exactly what this is going to mean for different bits of the country. I'm not going to I can't speak with a kind of authority that either Rosie or Ben can in terms of like how you actually, what that means explicitly for public affairs professionals beyond, you know, be useful and make sure that you're actually talking to them on areas that make sense, and both for their agenda and the powers that they have. But I thought it'd be helpful to, you know, talk about the white paper, what it says, and then maybe just jump into a few examples, you know, and make a broader point. There are currently 12 mayors. On May 2nd, we will have 14, and by next May, we're going to have 22 if all goes well. Now, that means that around 80% of the country are going to be covered by a mayor leading a strategic authority. And, you know, in the devolution bill, it's a significant bit of work, and it makes clear that this is like the floor of ambition, I think that's the word they use, and not the ceiling. So you can only expect that this process is going to continue in the years ahead. There's going to be, you know, there's an annual mechanism there for kind of reviewing some of the powers. So whatever you're doing now is a starting point, and it's going to get bigger. And that's kind of one of the broader points, is that this bill institutionalizes devolution as a default and not devolution by deal. Now, what that means is there's now a standardized approach to devolution. They've made clear how big they want these regional kind of strategic authorities, rather, how big they want them to be. They've made it clear what kind of accountability mechanisms they want them to have, and they've kind of expressed their preference for a mayor leading them most of the time for the full amount of settlement money. And obviously that has advantages and disadvantages. The advantages is that it's going to be consistent across the country, and as public affairs professionals, you will now know exactly what to expect, more or less, dealing with all of these different institutions across the country, although obviously there are now established authorities which have a bit more power than others, and you would expect them to go further, faster. Greater Manchester, South Yorkshire, West Yorkshire. So bear in mind that in 10 years, 15 years, a lot of these places are likely to be in a similar place, which is helpful for kind of when you're considering how to engage with them. There's I was also asked the question about timings before this, and you know, basically it's going to depend on the parliamentary calendar, but you know, if you want these 6 new elections to take place next May, that obviously implies that stuff is going to get going this year. So you know, bear in mind that this is kind of a kickoff point, but that other things are moving along. So the single settlements are going to be confirmed from 2026 to 2027, for example, and obviously there will be other details throughout the year. Spending review will presumably also include other bits of details about funding, etc., etc. And basically, it's a broad point to kind of everyone on this webinar. You know, this is the starting point, it's not the ending point, and that you're going to have to adapt the ways that you influence with government and the way the kind of stakeholder structures, because this is a change and it's going to be permanent and it's only going to get bigger. And the kind of within that, I think there's 2 other things like worth looking at. The first one is about economic growth. This underpins everything that the government does, and this underpins the devolution bill, the white paper. The bottom line is that uneven regional growth has been a barrier to kind of allowing the whole country to fulfill their potential, and that this is one of the leading reasons why they're going to allow strategic authorities to be making more decisions on a wider set of issues, so that they can you know, empower, so they can kind of make decisions that are closer to home, but also unify a lot of these things that previously weren't unified. Maybe, so an example, you know, job centre support is likely to be unified with, you know, police and security, likely to be unified with housing policy. So, you know, within the bill, for example, there's likely to be something about spatial development plans. Now that's going to be huge, because basically what it means is mayors are going to take a big role in deciding where housing goes. And that might actually, you know, on the point about that Rosie raised about dealing with the strategic authority and not just the mayor, that might be something the mayor might take more of an executive role in being able to decide, you know, where those housing developments get picked to go to. And that is important, because obviously for many years we've seen a system which has been resistant to change, and sometimes you can have local stakeholders who don't want, obviously, things, you know, classic, not in my backyard, things to go in specific places, but for the sake of the country, for the sake of economic growth, for the sake of dealing with these challenges, we need these kind of new strategic authorities to kind of be able to make those decisions. So, you know, as a public affairs practitioner, consider that you're going to be able to engage on a very wide set of issues, and that's only going to grow in the years ahead. And I thought a really interesting example of this that I'll mention quickly before we move on is about the job support. In the Get Britain Working paper, there was also discussions about the leading roles that mayors would now play in job support in the regions. And, you know, for a lot of people for many years, that, you know, it makes perfect sense. Mayors already have adult skills budgets, And now what it's going to mean is that they're going to be able to integrate that using all the knowledge that they've got to make better decisions about where the free courses funding goes, skills bootcamp funding, and basically just make more common sense decisions closer to the people who are actually experiencing them. So I hope that was a kind of clear overview of what's involved in the paper.
Yeah, no, that's very impressive that you've managed to do such a detailed run through of something which is fairly complicated. So thank you. And I think you've just actually helped me now just move on to another point, and that's around public affairs practitioners who are working for national organisations. Do we think that we need individual strategies for engaging with each Metro Mayor? Is that something that mayors and their teams expect? So I think that's probably Ben is the best person to answer that question.
Yes, I think you should. So national priorities may not be tailored to or appropriate for regions. So you have to think from a regional perspective here. It's not a one size fits all. So I would emphasize that you may have your national public affairs strategies, but it's not sufficient if you are lobbying or engaging with mayoral combined authorities or mayoral teams directly. You have to think locally, as I said in my previous comment, Jerry, otherwise it just won't land.
Okay. And Rosie, did you want to add to that? And actually, sorry, before Rosie does, can I I will let you answer in a moment, but if you have got questions, please do put them in the chat box. And if you have already submitted them, can you resubmit them? Because of course, our technical problems meant that we're all booted out. So yeah, so please carry on asking your questions.
I think this question depends on who the organisation is, their capacity and what they want to achieve. So different mayoral strategic authorities are at different journeys, different kind of stages in the devolution journey. And so engaging with them is going to look very different depending on who you engage with. So West Midlands, Greater Manchester, for example, they've had a mayor for, I mean, it's still a short amount of time, but for much longer than everywhere else. They've been, Greater Manchester's combined authority was established, or the framework for the combined authority was established for quite some time. So there was already a lot of partnership working happening in the area. So these more entrenched strategic authorities are very, very different to the ones that are emerging at the moment. So, for example, York and North Yorkshire have only been established for less than a year. They're still capacity building, and their ability to deliver is still being built. So bearing that in mind and understanding that places are at different journeys, at different stages of the journey, they've got different capacities, I think is quite important when you're engaging with them. I think even though the devolution bill and the white paper that we have already is going to make it easier to kind of understand where places are at, there's going to be levels rather than these kind of asymmetric deals. It's still very important to ensure that you understand that the area that you're engaging with. So you know what powers are in their deal, you know what resources they've got, you know where they're at in terms of their stage in the devolution journey, and you're not expecting, the new mayor in Hull that's going to be elected to suddenly be able to deliver everything that Andy Burnham's done in their first year of office. So understanding that I think is important, but if you're a small organisation with quite constrained capacity, you probably can't get into the depth of every strategic authority area and understanding all of them. So my suggestion would be to strategically identify the ones that matter most to you. So it might be that if you're really focused on early years and child poverty, for example, you would probably go to Kim McGuinness in the Northeast. She's establishing a child poverty reduction unit. They've stated as a stated aim of the combined authority that they want to reduce child poverty. You'd probably look at South Yorkshire as well, at Oliver Coppard. He's working on a safe bed for every child in that area. So you might want to go on kind of thematic strategic decisions about who to engage with, or you might want to kind of pick a few, like a broad range of places. So you might go for a really, well-established combined authority, your West Midlands or your Greater Manchester or perhaps West Yorkshire, and then some new emerging ones, perhaps in less urban areas. So the ones that are coming through, we are seeing more kind of rural areas. Agriculture is a big issue in York and North Yorkshire, and it will be in kind of Lincolnshire and Lancashire and kind of Cumbria as well. Are going to have different priorities and different concerns to address to those kind of big established urban combined authorities. So my suggestion would be, target a few rather than spreading yourself thinly and doing it badly.
Excellent, thank you. And I think we are up against the time today, because obviously we missed a number of a little bit of the session. So what I'm going to do now is we'll try our best to be completed by past, and I apologise. I hope people don't feel that they're shortchanged. So let me just open this now up to questions. And I think the first question we have is from John. And it's around employability and skills. He says the system is broken, and it's painful for those involved, and mayors and their teams may be reticent to actually rip off the Band-Aid. Is that a question for Rosie? Or
Mayors are reticent
and any idea
engage
how,
with skills.
Yeah. Any ideas how to help mayors open this too difficult box?
From my engagement with mayors, I don't think they're reticent to do it. We've seen, like in Greater Manchester, for example, in Liverpool City region, I think skills was probably one of the areas that Steve Rotherham focused most on in his first term. And in Greater Manchester, we're seeing the mayor and the combined authority asking for further powers on skills and education. I don't think it's a combined authority reticence challenge. I think the challenge is probably in with central government and actually devolving the powers that local areas need in order to be able to kind of develop a skill system that works for their local economy and local people.
Excellent.
I agree with John that it's a mess.
And can I just jump in there, Jerry, and echo what Rosie said on skills? It goes down to essentially is that for some areas, skills is still controlled by central government, and some funding you get piecemeal funding. There is an appetite amongst a lot of mayors to expand the remit of skills, and what the benefit of that is that you're having very tailored approaches. So in the West Midlands, as an example, we decided through our plan for growth what our priority growth areas, sectors were, clusters, and we decided that green growth, green manufacturing was an area where there was going to be substantial growth. We were then able to tailor a skills bootcamp and skills program around that. So I don't necessarily think it's reticence on the mayor side. I think there's some blockage in the pipes of the civil service and Whitehall that perhaps public affairs officials can lobby and help unblock.
Thank you. And I think let's go on to the next question. And I'm going to ask Larry to answer it first of all. And that's around local government reorganisation, and actually where you're seeing, of course, the abolition of districts and then upper tier authorities being put in their place. Do you think the mayor will have a big say on proposals that have been submitted when the ministers come to make their decisions? How much do you think the mayors will be able to influence those subs?
I think the bottom line is, it kind of going back to what Rosie said, right at the start, that these are partnerships that mayors are chairing, and so ultimately the proposals that come from the councils should be, should be the priority in terms of how they think reorganisation should work best. And, you know, I think in general, to answer the kind of secondary question, which I've seen in the chat, which is about, will reorganisation, you know, leave more communities behind? I think the bottom line is that a lot of people in these communities have been ill-served by quite a confusing system of accountability and responsibilities. And, you know, all over the country, we have different levels of governance for different things. And in general, I don't think I've seen evidence to say that that has led to better outcomes. In fact, you know, a lot of people may struggle to point to who is responsible for stuff like, you know, road maintenance, or stuff like, you know, bin collections, or, and then even on a bigger level, you know, jobs and skills policies, or you know, housing. And so it's more important that we simplify these structures and make it consistent across the country, so that we can allow these new strategic authorities to make the most of these systems. And also, you know, I don't think it's we necessarily fix all the issues by having more paid politicians. That's not always the solution. And so I think you know, sensible reorganization with consent from the people who are being reorganized, which is the approach that the government has taken so far, is absolutely the right thing to do.
Excellent. Now, I'm struggling to see any more of the questions. They're just going to be sent to me in a moment, but I'm going to just ask, actually, this is a question for Larry about our existing politicians, and actually the role of parliamentarians about campaigning and lobbying for their regions. What do you think those parliamentarians should or could be doing in terms of being a better voice for their region?
Well, I, maybe unpopular opinion, I think a lot of parliamentarians do a very good job of representing their region. They, you know, a lot of them, so one of the kind of findings from the mayoral paper we did last year is this idea, and, you know, it's not controversial at all, you know, structures that are entrenched and that are kind of embedded in a system actually do quite a good job often of kind of being accountable, etc. You know, parliamentarians have been around for, you know, a very long time, and you know, and their role has changed in recent years in terms of what is required of them. I know a lot of them now are taking on like casework responsibilities, often acting as like, you know, maybe counsellors in a lot of their areas. But I think there's interesting analysis of, you know, how often their constituency is mentioned in Parliament, and, you know, like Hansard, in Hansard, etc. And so the bottom line is a lot of parliamentarians are very good at representing their area. I think what the mayor's job is as a political representative is to draw their gaze wider and say, and, you know, kind of try and realign the political incentives, that just because something might not be popular in a constituency, which is often the case for decisions that government has to make and decisions that, you know, mayoral authorities have to make, doesn't mean that it's not worth doing. And so I think the model is very much a partnership model, and that's where party political stuff doesn't really matter. It's more about embedding incentives to look wider than just the area that elects them. I think you're on mute.
While Jerry's unmuting, I'll just add to Larry's point there that mayors, MPs, and local authority leaders and councillors are all legitimate actors in their own right. No one of those is anyone else's boss. Like, mayors are not the bosses of, you know, local authority leaders. And I think it's really important when you're engaging to know that there isn't a hierarchy there, and to be clear about who holds the power and go to that person. I think Jerry's back now.
I am back. Thank you, Rosie. And I suppose that's actually takes us on to one of those questions that we've just have in the box in terms of actually what will the roles of lower tier authorities, so of parish and town councils, will they actually see more increased powers? And will their role be in, where do you think the roles of town and parish councils will be? And I'm probably going to ask Rosie that question.
Yeah, in a former life, I was a town councillor and a town mayor. And just the word mayor is confusing because there are lots of different mayors, aren't there? I hear a lot of concerns from people about reorganisation. So already in England, we have very large local government. Internationally, when we compare internationally, the population size for a council in England is much larger than we see in Europe, in many European countries, for example. Making councils, kind of building councils where the population size is 500,000 is really huge. And that's quite significant when we look internationally. So improving and strengthening democracy at that local level, so people don't feel that power is being kind of sucked out of their local community and moved further down the road, is really, really important. There is a lot of work to do on improving the hyperlocal governance level across England. First of all, not everywhere has a parish council, not everywhere has a town council. So government will certainly need to be thinking about how do we kind of roll out, kind of complete the map of that hyperlocal level. Also, they need to be thinking about how we improve it. So at the moment, these roles, councillor roles, are unpaid, and that means that only people with the ability, the resource to be able to fund themselves, really, to take part as a councillor and to do that work, are able to do so. And that creates all kinds of problems for representation. So certainly there is a role for the hyperlocal level, but it certainly needs improvement, and that is really key and should be thought through in the devolution bill.
Excellent, thank you. And I suppose we've probably got time just for one last question. And I'm going to go for what do you see as the longer term role in health for mayors? Is that Eleri? I'm going to ask Eleri and Ben to answer that. Eleri.
Yeah, so in the white paper, it was made clear that one of the ambitions is the word has now escaped me, but basically standardizing the boundaries for the different levels of governance that we have. So obviously that includes stuff like police and crime, it includes stuff like probation service, job service, but that also includes ICBs and the NHS and the integrated care partnerships, integrated care boards, etc. Now, there are already models of mayors taking a role in their integrated care system. So, for example, I think Oliver Coppard and Andy Burnham, correct me if there's more, Rosie and Ben, but are currently the chairs of their ICBs. And so what that allows them to do is, again, with this idea of this unifying power of mayors, about allowing mayors to look at a whole host of factors and policy areas to make kind of better decisions for their community, allows them to take that kind of holistic view and then consider what elements of health have impact stuff like, inequality, spatial and otherwise, access to jobs, skills. And so I think at a minimum, that is a great model. I don't know exactly how far that will go in the future. Obviously, health intersects with a lot of policy areas. I think it's likely that as mayors mature and these institutions mature, they may want to have more of a say in terms of community healthcare. And that is also certainly one of the ambitions of the government in the review, from the kind of hospital to the community. So I expect that those two things will likely work hand in hand, but I can't predict exactly how that will look like.
Okay, thank you. And Ben, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I shall, and I shall be quite controversial and say it depends if mayors want it. Many mayors might not want to touch it with a barge pole, just because of the complications and the political challenges, and also challenges around demography, health inequalities, etc. It's a big thing to add to a mayoral role. And the question for those that are developing a devolution framework is it the right forum, the right governance structure for health to be a part of that? If the answer is, or the purpose of devolution is to drive economic growth, there is a role for health devolution there is a role for it to play, but it cannot be in its entirety. So a good example of where devolved working can make a real difference in health is on data sharing and innovation. So can trusts within a mayor or combined authority geographic structure, how can they share data across trusts about patients and citizens within that region. It's very difficult to do so now. It's very difficult to do across educational boundaries. It's very difficult to do so across local authorities. So data sharing is one opportunity for devolution that can have a real significant impact.
Excellent, thank you. Now, time is really up, we are up against the time, so we've got 2 more minutes. So I'm going to ask each of the panelists to very quickly give us a key takeaway from this session. So I'm going to go to Rosie first of all.
When you're engaging with mayors, be place focused and understand their unique situation. And I would just very quickly also add on the devolution white paper, mayors are going to have the right to request new powers. So if the area that you're wanting to influence on isn't already within their gift and it isn't something that they can use their soft power, which is very significant to work on, perhaps working with them on requesting that power is devolved to them could be beneficial.
Excellent. Larry.
It's not going away. So, you know, you're going to have to adapt. The whole system is going to have to adapt to a new level of regional political incentives. And, you know, I, for one, think that's a great thing. It means that we can bring decisions closer to the community. It means that communities have more power and accountability over the way that, you know, government even affects them. And ultimately, it's great that public affairs professionals are engaging with that new system because it gives it legitimacy and authority. So yeah, go forth and engage.
Excellent, thank you. And Ben, what would you sum up today?
Lastly, I think all the points the panelists have made are correct. Devolution is here to stay, but it's important to think of it as an evolutionary process, and we're still at an embryonic phase. It gets exciting when you include fiscal powers and mayors can start firing those bullets. That's when it gets really juicy and exciting. So public affairs practitioners need to get ahead of the curve now, start engaging, and to do that, think locally and think in partnerships.
Excellent, Ben. And I think you've just actually, I was going to sum this up by, and I know the advice that I give my clients, my team, is don't get left behind, you know, and this is, you know, I think personally, it's an exciting opportunity, an exciting Absolutely. Time to be involved in regional politics and be focus on place. So I think that now probably takes us to the end of this afternoon's webinar. All it now remains for me to say, and there's a great personal thank you to Larry, to Rosie, to Ben, but also a great thanks to you as well, wherever you're listening. Thank you for being so patient. I know I've just aged in the last hour with all our technical difficulties, but thank you so much. And I suppose all it has to remain for me to do is to wish you a very good afternoon. Say good afternoon.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Bye. And thanks to Caitlin for organising as well.
Absolutely.
Bye.